There are lots of Bible translations out there. Most of us are familiar with translations like the King James Version, the English Standard Version, the New International Version, all the other versions, and some of them are very popular. The three that I mentioned are among the most popular in the English language, and there are other versions that are less well known, and then there are some that were in vogue for a while but now are waning in popularity. But then there are a few that are used by people who occupy the outskirts of Christendom. And we're going to talk about one of those in particular, one called the New World Translation. This version is used by the Jehovah's Witnesses. They argue that the New World Translation is the most accurate, most reliable version available. They also argue that other translations can't be trusted because they've been corrupted over time. Now, the New Testament of the New World Translation was published in 1950. The Old Testament appeared in sections soon thereafter, with the entire Bible following in 1961. But how accurate is this version? I'd guess that most people probably have never personally held a copy of it. So if it's so good, why don't we see more of it? The short answer is because it's a terrible translation. Virtually no bona fide biblical scholar would say that it's accurate. In fact, scholars have pointed out over and over again that the translators deliberately changed words in this version to fit their doctrines. Well, this is no great surprise because as far as we can tell, the translation team was made up of 5 people, none of whom had any extensive knowledge of the biblical languages. The names of the members were deliberately concealed, supposedly for the purpose of directing the reader to the Bible's author, Jehovah God. This has every appearance of being a calculated maneuver, as only one of the 5 translators had a university-level education, and he left school after 2 years without completing an undergraduate degree. That one person did have some introductory training in Greek, but was completely self-taught in what little Hebrew he did actually know. Now, this is a massive problem. You cannot translate a text if you don't know the languages. And the fact is that the names and credentials, or lack thereof, of the so-called translators were obscured. And that should tell us that something funny is going on. And it was. The people responsible for putting together the New World Translation essentially rewrote the Bible to fit their very peculiar doctrines. One of the most glaring problems is the fact that the New Testament was essentially reworked to deny the deity of Jesus. Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that Jesus was divine. One article on jw.org says, "Just what is meant by the divinity of Christ? Apparently there is considerable confusion on the subject, even among those belonging to denominations teaching it. As with many other teachings of the Bible, religious leaders have gone to extremes. On the one hand, there are those that argue that Jesus Christ was never more than a mere human. And on the other hand, the Trinitarians argue that he always existed and always was divine. The Bible truth, as we shall see, lies about halfway between these two extremes." So they consider the belief in the deity of Christ to be something extreme that goes beyond what the Bible teaches. Well, the early church taught and believed this. We even have archaeological evidence in things like the Megiddo church inscription that demonstrate it. But let's take a closer look at the text itself. So how does the New World Translation handle passages that clearly point to the divinity of Christ? Well, let's go to Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, which is one of the clearest passages of the New Testament concerning the deity of Christ. "Because by means of him all other things were created in the heavens and on the earth, the things visible and the things invisible, whether they are thrones or lordships or governments or authorities. All other things have been created through him and for him. Also, he is before all other things, and by means of him all other things were made to exist." This is probably a familiar passage to you, but you might notice that this version sounds a little bit off. Now, why is that? The answer is because this translation includes the word other 4 times in these 2 verses. This word does not appear in the original Greek text. So why add these words? Because remember, Jehovah's Witnesses deny the divinity of Jesus. Here they have dishonestly added the word other into the text to make it sound like Jesus is just another created thing. This is not a new idea. It's actually a 1700-year-old heresy known as Arianism. Now, the thing is, when you're creating a new religious movement, you want to try to avoid making the same mistakes that other people made in the past. Charles Taze Russell, the man who founded the Jehovah's Witnesses, apparently didn't know much about church history, or theology, or the original languages. Well, the New World Translation does some other interesting things. It replaces the word cross with torture stake. In Matthew 10:38, it says, "And whoever does not accept his torture stake and follow after me is not worthy of me." Now, this isn't so much a mistranslation as an alternative translation based on religious bias. According to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the cross was a pagan symbol adopted by Christian apostates. So instead of a cross, they envision Jesus as being executed on a stake. Well, the Greek word stauros can mean a stake and often does in ancient Greek literature. But it seems that by the Roman era, the word referred to a T-shaped instrument of crucifixion, the same one with which we are all familiar. So again, this is just a really odd translation driven by personal feelings. Well, one of the most peculiar things the New World Translation does is it puts the name Jehovah in the New Testament 237 times. Now, the name Jehovah is not in the Greek text, and contrary to what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, it's not even a biblical name for God. The name Jehovah was accidentally created by English translators as a result of misunderstanding the Hebrew text. Well, let's look at one example where the New World Translation inserts Jehovah into the New Testament. And we can find that in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19, where Jesus is reading from the book of Isaiah. He says, "Jehovah's Spirit is upon me, because he anointed me to declare good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and a recovery of sight to the blind, to send the crushed ones away free, to preach Jehovah's acceptable year." Because Jehovah's Witnesses put so much emphasis on the name Jehovah, it's kind of their brand, they insert the name into the text. In this passage where the title Lord appears, they replace it with Jehovah. Again, that's not what the Greek text says. The Greek text uses the word kurios, which means Lord. And here we want to point out several things. Number one, Jehovah is not what the Greek text says. Like many other places in the New World Translation, the translators have changed the text because of their theological bias. Their translation methodology is fundamentally dishonest. Number two, there is no evidence that the name Jehovah appeared in ancient manuscripts of the New Testament. There are no copies of any New Testament books that include this name. Number three, the name Jehovah is not a biblical name for God. It was created by English translators who misinterpreted the Hebrew text. In fact, there was no J in biblical Hebrew, and the consonant pronounced as a V in Jehovah would have originally been pronounced as a W in classical Hebrew. So there's a lot going on there. Well, to sum everything up, scholars understand that the New World Translation is not a translation, but a perversion. And Jehovah's Witnesses work very hard to cherry-pick scholarly reviews of the New World Translation to make it seem like experts support it. In fact, they do not. Greek scholar Julius Manti called it a shocking mistranslation. William Barclay said it is abundantly clear that a sect which can translate the New Testament like that is intellectually dishonest. Famed New Testament scholar Bruce Metzger called it a frightful mistranslation that was erroneous, pernicious, and reprehensible. There is zero doubt in my mind that our Jehovah's Witness neighbors are good people who sincerely want to do the will of God. And they want other people to do it also. They're very evangelistic. But the Bible they use is fraught with problems that put their salvation in jeopardy. And maybe the most difficult thing is that their beliefs, which this mistranslation supports, are not Christian in any sense.